When they arrived at the old monastery, the moon was high. Using teleportation from Isocross had been a gambit, but whilst they had not ended up where they expected, and in truth they had no idea where they had ended up, it was at least an area heavy with trees, so it was simple enough to travel via plants and then a few days' hike from there. Well, this seems to be the place. It's much more of a ruin than I expected. Wasn't it only abandoned about 40 years ago? Yes. I heard that the walls were torn down when the order was disbanded. Okay, well, let's get some food and get a fire going. Get some rest. If that portal works, we've got a long day tomorrow. Cloud quickly gathered some firewood while Just Me found a good vantage point to keep watch from. The water seems clean and there's plenty of mushrooms around. Should make a nice soup for a change. What, like these? Oh, young Liang, these smaller ones. But if we were to eat those red ones, we wouldn't have a good time tomorrow. As the fire was stoked and the soup began to cook, Maldus and Cloud went to look at the portal. Even though it was not active, its powerful transportation magic could still be seen flickering in the dark. Let's hope that activation word works, otherwise we've wasted a lot of time. I'd be surprised if he got it wrong. Well, let's make sure we got a full watch tonight. This place has got strange vibes. Yeah, that'll happen when you got a gateway to hell across the stream. Hey everyone, so I'm Clara, and a little while ago I painted a Yeti, a figure from Atlantis Minutes, and made a little sort of scene to go with that little video, which is really ropey, but I thought I'd do it again, so hopefully you enjoyed that. But yeah, in this I'm going to be building some fantasy scenery, so I'm trying to make it's fairly sort of realistic looking scenery, but then I've incorporated in this couple of Warhammer pieces. And sort of also sort of turn the watercolor a little bit more turquoisey to make it a little bit more fantasy. So yeah, I'm going to show you how I did it and what I used. Some of these techniques I've done for the first time. I'm going to split it up into two parts, so a lot of the finer details like making the well and the sorting out the portal and a whole bunch of other stuff, that's going to go into the second video. But this one is more of the basics, and so it gets to the point where I've got all the grass and also the river and stuff like that. So hopefully you like it, and yeah, hopefully you like it. So I first of all I got some sort of chipboard and I cut it to the size I wanted. I had to stick an extra piece on the end because I didn't have any wide enough, but that would be strong enough once I'd sort of done the next layer, which is the XPS. XPS, extruded polystyrene, is used for lots of sort of scenery modelling. I actually got this thinner stuff from Amazon, and then I got some thick stuff from a home improvement store, your sort of B&Q type thing. And I just stuck down the various layers with lots and lots of PVA glue. So it was nice and firm, and then stuck some books over the top of it just until it dried. So this gave me the sort of, I already had the idea of what size and shape of the model I wanted, based around these two Warhammer diorama pieces that I had. So once I did that, I just positioned them to make sure it looked sort of how I expected, and then I started carving in the bank. So the idea was that the portal was going to be on a raised hill, and then there'd be a river in the middle, and then the sort of monastery on the other side. So I just cut it roughly to shape until it was where I was happy with. Once I'd done that, I actually used plaster of Paris, and I covered the whole thing with plaster of Paris, and then on the banks and the riverbed where I wanted it a bit smooth, I used some Das clay just to sort of give it a nice smooth touch. Once I did that, I used the XPS and cut it into sort of thin, sort of 2-3mm thick pieces, and cut out some paving stones, I rounded the edges, and then I sort of crinkled them. I went over the top with a ball of aluminium foil just to sort of give it this rock type appearance. And then I used some scenery glue, so this is the thick sort of stuff you can get from various manufacturers. I think this one's a Vallejo ground coverage. It's just sort of like a thick paint with some sort of sand in it. It just, yeah, I could basically put it on top of the clay and then just push the paving stones into it. It worked really well. And then I sort of went over all the rest of the sand, the ground with that. And once I'd done that, I actually took some mould of some rocks that I liked, and I cast some rocks out of plaster of Paris. I stuck them in the side of the river, and I stuck one in the middle of the riverbank. and a big one in the near the front of the diorama. And then I also built up the base where the monastery was going to sit a little bit higher. And once I just to sort of try and blend it in a little bit more, make it sort of look like stone, but then there was still a gap, so around it I started putting a layer of PVA glue and sort of rubble. I've got various sort of size stones for making the bases of dioramas, so I sort of used a mix of different ones. There's no real manufacturing as such, it's just, you know, random ones that I've got. And then I continued to do this. I wanted to put more along the sort of sides of the riverbank, but on the sides, not so much on the bottom, although I did put some in the bottom to make it a little bit rougher. So basically I'm just sticking on some PVA glue in there. It's a watered down, thick PVA glue, and then I'm just scattering in. I think you can see I've got a couple of different size tubs. I've got a mixture of 3 different ones. I'm not too worried about the colours because I'm going to be painting it over anyway. So once I've done that, this was my first thing where it was something I'd not done before, and if I'm honest, I was a bit rubbish at it. I've got various different grass lengths flocking, and the idea is that you put some isopropanol on the base, so it was the ground area where I wanted it. Obviously I covered up areas I didn't want the grass, and then I watered down some PVA glue which I sprayed onto the area I wanted the grass, and then you get these static grass applicators. But if I'm honest, it didn't necessarily stand up as well as I would have liked. I got different thicknesses, but I just didn't get it right. Like I say, it didn't really stand up. In some areas it looked great, it really stuck up, but in others it just sort of fell flat. But it is what it is. So then what I did was a bit like before, I made a cast silicone mould of a large rock. To be honest, it had a nice texture, but I was playing around, and then I actually made a thin cast of that out of plaster of Paris. It had this nice texture, and then I broke it up. So the idea was that inside the monastery it looked like it had this different texture to the paving tiles. It had this sort of ground, I guess cement, which doesn't make sense given the sort of age, but whatever. It was this cement floor, but then the ground was really breaking through. And then I stuck it down using that textured ground paint that I showed earlier. And then on top of that I also started painting, so I painted sort of all the mud areas kind of dark brown and dried back from citadel paints. And then I added some bigger rocks. I wanted to pick out some of the different rocks, so I painted them a different colour around the outside of the citadel's base, and so I just started painting those. Then I realised I had these plastic cylinders. So these were actually the insides of doggy bags. Not doggy bags for giving out at parties, but doggy bags for picking up dog poop. I saved some of the insides, and it turned out that they were pretty much the same sort of size and shape, diameter as the pillars in the monastery, and so I thought that I could use them as extra pillars to show the falling down of the monastery and everything. I then filled the ends with some more XPS. I just cut it to size and glued it in, and then I put them on cocktail sticks and put them in the end. So the idea was that it could be sort of, some of the columns have still got bricks and plaster attached, but some of them are just fallen and broken, so I put a few in the ground, and I actually rested one on the floor. So then the broken paving that I had on the inside, I basically painted it grey, did a light brush and wash, and then also sort of put a wash into all the stones that I put around the outside. So I said that I painted them all sort of a brown, and then I dry brushed them, and then I used some wash on various stones that I had, and it just sort of tied it all together. Then I wanted to make a well, so I thought it'd be really cool if there was a well next to it. So I got some more XPS, I cut it to the size of the height of the thickness, and make the thickness so that it was the sort of size I wanted. Cut these rings and then cut sort of brick type shapes, so it looked like a circular brick, and made a few of them, and I used a mini for reference of how high it was. And then with that I was able to basically I painted it grey, and then I dry brushed it and did everything I could to make it look like brick, like it was made out of bricks. Then I actually cut a hole into the surface for well, once I'd got through the sort of plaster of Paris, it was easy to dig it down, and then I just filled the inside, sealed it all, and then painted it up. It didn't need much because you're not going to see it loads, but I just wanted it to look like dirt basically on the inside. Yeah, and then what I thought was I wanted a little bit more dirt sort of between the paving stones, just to sort of bring it in a little bit. And for this I actually used dirt, right? So I went out into the garden, dug up some sort of dry dirt, let it dry out, bake it, and then baked it just to sort of make sure there was nothing growing in it, and then used PVA glue around my paving stones and just sprinkled it on. Why not use natural stuff if you can? It was the sort of consistency, so because it was fairly fine, it just sort of give more of a gradual build up than some of the other stuff that I had. Then I had this piece of scenery from Warhammer. I think it was this Warhammer sort of scenery bases or something, and I took one of those. I thought it'd be quite good as a sort of broken mural, so stuck it down. I painted the base kind of beige colour, and then washed it and dry brushed it, and then I actually went over with cackle paint and put gold on top of it for the central relief area, but then went over it with a dry brush, so that just sort of scraped off a whole bunch of it, but it still gives this gold underneath, so it just looked like worn, you know, what used to be gold leaf, and it's just completely worn off. Then once I did that, I just I sort of carried on dry brushing the rocks really. So you can see one of the pillars here that I've actually stuck in the ground. Yeah, and I just was dry brushing it. Simple as that really. Until I was happy with it, and so I think you can really see the rocks inside of the river there as well, and the big one that I put near the front of the diorama. So yeah, I just sort of got it looking how I wanted it. Then you know, I then went around some of the details like I did with the paving stones before, and added more dirt just to sort of really blend it all together, make it look like a more natural transition from grass to whatever it was, especially around the back and around the sides of the portal. I really wanted that to be sort of, because there's going to be a lot less grass around that area, right, where it's sort of all falling down. It's quite steep, so there wasn't grass around there, and I just built it up with rock. Yeah, I was quite happy with it in the end. And then just sort of keep on spraying it over with isopropyl, and then spraying it over with watered down PVA glue just to keep it all on. I then started adding some bigger rocks as well, just to sort of build up, because I wasn't really happy with how it was at this stage. So I started adding more, because, you know, this is a monastery and a lot of it's fallen down, so there's going to be a lot of rubble and debris around. So, you know, eventually I painted it up. Then I decided that I wanted, so between the broken cement on the inside of the monastery, I realised that I wanted patches of grass where the grass is breaking through. So this is why, you know, the floor's broken up, because the ground's coming through and the grass is growing. So I put PVA glue down and put some spots of turf down using the flocking that I have, and just sort of got it how I wanted it and where I wanted it, just to really sort of make it look like a mixture of grass and rubble. And then I actually made up some moss. So this is some dark green flocking, which you mix with quite a lot of PVA and just smear it into the rocks, and it looks great as a great along the side of the riverbank, and it looks great sort of growing up sort of damp walls and stuff like that. It's just this green moss, and it really started pulling everything together. I think really pushed them into the sides below the portal. I was really pleased with how it looked in the end. It was really coming together. Then I wanted to make some weeds for the bottom of the sort of seaweedy type stuff, so I got some twine, and basically I just pulled it apart. I used glue on the end just to keep that together, so that I could stretch out the ends and cut it. Some of them I actually twisted into more root structures and used PVA to sort of keep those structures together. Others I just completely feathered out, and they were going to be for my seaweed. The reason that I did the ends, glued the ends together, so these are the feathered out ones for my seaweeds, and I stuck the ends together so that I could do this for painting them. So I stuck them on some masking tape. So I had all these different sort of seaweedy, there's probably a proper word for this, but yeah, once I'd done that, I was able to just sort of hold them, and I painted them with my airbrush. So I used a whole bunch of different green and yellow inks just to give them a bit of variation. So I wanted them fairly dark green, but with a bit of variation, so I just sort of moved it. And then once I had them, I could stick them in the bottom of my riverbed. So I used some glue, super glue, and I put them where I wanted them. So I thought I had this stone which I'd stuck in the middle of the riverbed. I thought there'd be quite a lot of them around it, so I put some around one side, and then I was like, hey, you know, we need some more. And actually I sort of built this up quite heavily, put quite a lot in, so I made it quite thin around the top end, and then downriver it was all sort of spread out. So I thought it looked pretty good once I'd done it. And then I started doing it around the edges where there was rocks sticking out where the riverbed was going to be as well. Also, some of the ones that I've done earlier to be more like roots, the brown ones, I had them so they're like plant and tree roots sticking out of the riverbed, so I stuck them in the side of the riverbed. Yeah, so I was quite pleased with all that. Once I'd done that, I also added more of my sort of mossy paste to the diorama, but also to the riverbed, and to tie in where my seaweed was, and to tie in the bottom of the things. And then it was time to get on with the river. So I used an epoxy resin. I didn't measure it accurately enough. The first pour was great. I added a little bit of sort of tint to it, and I poured it in, and I made this thin layer. I made sure it was all flat and level. I mixed it right and just poured it in the base of the river. I was really happy with how this came out, and it came out really transparent. It was really good. But then this was really good. I also put some to simulate a puddle on the rock, little thing, and then I used a heat gun to get rid of some of the air bubbles. Then what I did was I drilled some holes, and I had some reed models, so I put these reeds in. I just sort of glued them in, and then I put some broken bit of the drawbridge, the bridge that I was going to make later, and a log. I had a little log, so I had all these little, these reeds and this log and stuff like that. And I actually held all this in place with a UV curing resin. I thought that'd be alright. Then I did a second pour, so at this point you could see the bottom of the riverbed really well. However, I made a brighter sort of mix for the second pour to make the river deeper, and I thought that'd be a nice kind of depth. And as you can see, I sort of pushed the logs around that were in there, the broken bits of bridge, and put a bit in the well. But unfortunately, I mustn't have got the mixture quite as well, because it was a little bit, couldn't really see the bottom of the river, to be honest. Once I'd done this, it dried a little bit cloudy, and I think I just got the mixing wrong with the ratios. So first pour was perfect. After that, I actually sort of used some thick Vallejo water texture gel to make some waves in the river to have it going downhill, which goes on white but dries clear. And then just to sort of reduce the level of that, I used some thin Vallejo water texture stuff over the top. So that meant that you just had these nice little ripples sticking up, and then I was able to go around them and give them a little dry brush with white paint, so around the edges and around the rock. So sadly, because it was slightly cloudy, you can't really see the bottom of my river and all those beautiful seaweeds, but I still wanted to show you the steps because I was pretty pleased with those. I just wish I'd got this bit, the pour a little bit better, but there you go. Also, you could sort of see the difference on the two layers. But there you have it. That was the first part of my video. So that's how I made this scenery. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I suppose I could go into, I didn't want to linger on anything too much, but maybe if you've got comments on any particular technique, comment below. Maybe I'll be able to do a follow-up video just concentrating on certain aspects. And hopefully you like that. Like, subscribe, and don't forget there'll be a second part where I go into more details, more of the detail-y stuff. So thanks so much. Give us a thumbs up if you can, and until next time, bye.